I think in those moments where we have that experience of I see it all, that's actually when we approach bliss. Because if we're able to see it all, we're able to accept it all just in that moment.
Welcome to Soror Mystica, a podcast exploring life's mysteries and magic through its symbols.
I'm Mariana Lewis, an archetypal tarotist.
And I'm astrologer Cristina Farella.
And just as the Soror Mystica guided the alchemist through his holy work, we hope to be your mystic sisters in these conversations, guiding you deeper into the symbolic life. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 11th episode of Soror Mystica. Today, we are talking all about the sun. It's a nice follow-up to our moon episode because we're very cute.
We were very proud of ourselves.
What do we do after the moon? We do the sun, obviously. So before we jump into the sun and talk about all the solar brilliant things, I want to just let everybody know that I have a workshop that's starting in about a week at this point, I think, which is called The Foundations of the Tarot. And this is for the ultimate beginner. This is for the person who has maybe just got the deck and they're just trying to figure out how to work with it, or they've had it a little while and just can't seem to get a handle on the cards. They feel really overwhelming. They can't memorize them, these kinds of things. So in this workshop, it's a 3-week workshop. It's starting May 23rd, which is a Tuesday. And we are going to move through all the fundamentals of what you need to know, starting out with the tarot. We're going to do practice so that we actually work together and you get some guided practical information, because that can be left out of these classes a lot. So I want to make sure that element is there. And we're also going to talk about how to really start to build that relationship with the cards so that you don't have to just get lost in the weeds of memorization, but you can really, really kind of jumpstart that journey, both as a reader and, as a person moving through their own individuation, how the cards can support that, how they support the psycho-spiritual journey, how you can use them in that way. It's just going to be really good and exciting. I'm really excited for it because I get to talk about all the little details that I kind of don't get to talk about in my more advanced level courses. So this is going to be a great one. So if you want to know more about that, make sure to check out my website, persephonessister.com, or my Instagram, or anywhere. And I hope to see you there.
It's going to be so good. I'm really excited for this. Very, very excited for you.
So what are you reading?
So right now I'm actually rereading Tales from Ovid. It's Ted Hughes' kind of rendition of some of Ovid's Metamorphosis. And I really am not ever team Ted Hughes. I am firmly team Sylvia Plath. But these renditions are really gorgeous. The only thing is that he's kind of he takes the darkest of the dark stories. It's not all of them. And he did his own translations. And so it's kind of a little bit of a heavy sort of underworldy feeling read. But I'm doing it just to kind of refamiliarize myself with just myths in general. Not that I'm never thinking about myths, but I'm teaching my asteroids class, which is about the masks of myth. So I've been just going back and plundering my archives and trying to put things back into my little baby brain. So that's where I'm at.
That's great.
Yeah. What are you reading?
Well, before I tell you, did I ever tell you that about my Sylvia Plath debate club days?
I don't know.
Does that make any sense as a sentence?
That does ring a bell, and now I need to know.
When I was in high school, I was on the speech and debate team, but I did not debate because that is not what people with Mars and Scorpio are good at. They're just good at yelling. But I did the speech part, and so there were actually several divisions, and one of them was a division called oratory, or oral interpretation, actually. Which was just reading poetry. That's all it was. And you got scored on how well you could read poetry. And so I started off with Sylvia Plath. and at like 14 or whatever. And I had no idea what any of it was about, but I was very proud of myself for choosing it. And my first competition, I won first place because I was really good at reading poetry. And then I got like 6th place in the next time and then never placed again. And then
oh my God.
I think I had the problem of like, being a perfect child syndrome. And I was like, I have to do better each time, but you can't do better than first place.
You can't top it.
Okay. So what I'm reading is, right now I'm actually reading a delightful little thing, a book that my mom got me actually a few years ago, called The Memoirs of a Medieval Woman. And it is about Marjorie Kempe. I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name. Have you heard of her?
Yes. I think it's Kemp, but
Kemp. Yeah. So she is this is the most scholars believe the first instance of an autobiography in the English language that she wrote. And she was like a wannabe mystic and was very weird lady. Did a lot of weird things, had a very interesting personality, very forceful. And so this is like it's not her actual memoirs because those are in Middle English, which are very hard to read. Right. And I'm not going to fight my way through that, but basically like a summary of it and like a book about it. And it's cool. It's cute. So that's what I'm reading. So let's talk about the sun.
Yeah, the sun. So yes, it was your idea to do a sun episode. And I thought that was perfect.
Yeah.
And I do think that the sun is so interesting because, we have like a lot of attention paid to the moon in our mystical kind of world of tarot and astrology and occultism and all of that, because there's a huge effort to kind of reclaim the moon because the moon has been maybe more repressed or subjugated or denigrated or whatever. And the sun has been the thing that probably is like a symbol of literally the enlightenment. If you think about the light that we get from the sun, we're living in a solar world, which is to say we're living in a world that tends to skew towards the masculine. Now, I'm saying this in 2023. I actually have a hard time feeling a lot of the time like that's super true still. Like I think that feminism has made a lot of strides actually, and I hope that I'm saying that very tenderly because I know that there's obviously a lot of fucking cruelty in this world towards women and, women identifying people. But we're living in a world where we've shifted that balance a little bit, so I think that that's interesting. And maybe in that space, we get to kind of reclaim the sun as well. And we get to say the sun is actually not just for the masculine or the patriarchal, but the sun is something that is integral to all of us and that we deserve to have a relationship with as much as the moon and as much as, any other piece of the environment. So we're going to kind of unpack solar energy today and see where it pops up, which is many, many places. And I think that like the moon episode, when we were talking about the qualities of the moon to begin our talk, I was reading from Richard Tarnas's Cosmos and Psyche. And I'm going to do that again because it's just such a good well of words associations about these planets. So I'm going to just give a little overview of what Richard Tarnas assigns to the archetype of the sun. And Cosmos and Psyche is a book about astrological cycles and cycles of history. And it's an archetypal astrology book. And it's also one of those where it's like, I need to book club it because alone managing this text is like, it's a lot. So he says, sun is the central principle of vital creative energy, the will to exist, the impulse and capacity to be, to manifest, to be active, to be central, to radiate and to shine, to rise above, achieve, illuminate, and integrate, the individual will and personal identity, the seat of mind and spirit, the animus, the executive functions of self or ego, the capacity for initiative and purposeful assertion, the drive for individual autonomy and independence, directed and focused consciousness and self-awareness, and the centrifugal expression of the self. And he goes on. There's like a whole other chunk of a paragraph here, but I'm going to stop there because it's a great little bouquet.
Yeah.
And I've totally stolen that centrifugal expression of self phrase. I use that all the time in my readings and in my conversations with people and my teaching about the sun. I love the idea of the sun as that center or the centrifugal force, that thing that like force the self is like emanating out from a central point
Yep.
into the rest of the world from. So anyway, that is where we're starting, and that gives us a good place to kind of pull apart
Yeah.
pieces of this.
I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's really excellent, especially this idea of that that central like ego experience and how that kind of radiates outwards and shines. It's when we talk about the ego, especially when we talk about it, in a more serious way, a psychological way, we're not talking about it as, the part of us that is self-centered. We're talking about the sense of self. Who am I? The answer to the question, who am I? The I who does whatever or experiences whatever in life. And I think that the sun is a very prominent archetype of that central experience of self. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot in mythology is the idea of the solar hero, who is, sometimes that's literal, sometimes that is like an actual god, mythology about a god who is some kind of a solar figure. And a lot of times we're just speaking of that heroic kind of you know ego focused person who is going out and achieving whatever he's supposed to achieve. This is a very, for example, the chariot in the tarot feels like a very solar hero kind of figure. And so the qualities that we associate with this archetype is self-determination, willpower, clarity of purpose, confidence and courage. These are things that we associate with that solar hero image that really moves us forward, because there's so much clarity about what the point of things are and who we are. So I like bringing in that image of the sun, because I think that's one of the ways that it serves us today. It's one of the things we were talking about is how our society is so oriented toward the masculine and has been for thousands of years, but we are rebalancing things. And I would say that the way that we're most successful about rebalancing things is archetypally. So
Mm-hmm.
far,
Mm-hmm.
the social world has to follow the archetypal shifts that happen within us. And so that's
Mm-hmm.
going to be a slower progression. But we're certainly feeling the shift toward allowing and balancing with the lunar experience. But I always am really careful about throwing out the solar experience, throwing out the other side of it, because of course, when we try to rebalance, we're going to err too much to the opposite side. We're going to oscillate too far in the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
And the sun is equally vital to the moon archetypally for us.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's like, it's the sort of, it's a very, very important set of archetypes to have in balance with one another. And I think that even just keeping in mind the fact that the rhythm of the seasons and the rhythm of our days and nights is regulated by the balance of the sun and the moon, and each of those two luminaries always being in relationship with one another is such
Yeah.
an important force of like agriculture and
Yep.
timekeeping and everything that kind of gives our world its shape is something that we need to remember too. So of course, I was just thinking back to what I said at the opening, and I agree with you. You said what I wanted to say, but better, which is what you always do, is like, we are living in a world where there is a heightened awareness, I think, of the need to reclaim that feminine,
Yeah.
and the archetypal shifts within do create shifts without. But yeah, we're living in a world that still needs to catch up with us. But
Yeah.
but that's okay. So I think that, just kind of thinking about the sun and its importance culturally is an important, or maybe a juicy place to dig in.
Yeah.
Every culture has a sun god. And what's interesting about, the sun gods is that they're always a bit like impersonal or removed.
Mm-hmm.
I know that in our Greek tradition, Helios is the sun god
Yeah.
who drives his chariot through the sky each day. But he doesn't interact a whole lot. Like he has a job that he's
Yeah.
doing. He cannot let the chariot wobble. And even, we have that story of his son. I forget his name. Is it
Phaethon? Phaethon? It's
Phaethon?
it's
Yeah.
Phaethon. I'm like
Okay.
100% sure.
Okay, cool. So we've got that name.
But I don't know how to say
probably
it.
Phaethon.
Yeah.
Asking to please, he goes to his father and he's so excited. And I think the deal is like, he doesn't realize that he is a god or the descendant of a
Yeah,
god.
he's like a demigod. I
Yeah.
think his mother is mortal, and yeah.
And then he goes to his dad and says, please, I need you to grant me a wish. And Helios says anything. And he says, I want to drive your chariot for a day. And Helios is like, I wish you'd asked me for anything else, but since I'm a god and I promised you anything, I will now grant you this. I don't know why they couldn't negotiate, but anyway, the poor kid flew.
Everything is black and white in the world of the gods.
Exactly. And so he flew his chariot he scorched the earth. He flew it too close to earth. Yeah. He flew it up too high and he, the horses almost froze. He's also like snapped by the claws of the Scorpion constellation in doing this. And
cool.
Eventually he falls into the sea and
I think Zeus like sends a thunderbolt to like take him down. Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting. And so Helios, right, in all of that, lets this happen. We also know that in the Persephone myth, Helios observes the abduction of Persephone, but doesn't say anything until Demeter asks him directly, like, what did you see? And then he reveals that he saw the whole thing. So there's this interesting sort of like remove or objectivity about the sun in its high position, carving our day, carving the space of the day. And I think that that's interesting when we connect the sun later to the masculine and to these ideas of what is rational and what is objective and empirical, right? So with the sun, we have all of this kind of material around like being objective and shedding light on something, enlightening ourselves means we're having a mental or an intellectual connection be made. And that's, I think, a distinctive shift from the moon to the sun. The moon is interior and heart-centered or psychic. The moon sees things that are liminal and maybe not visible to the eye, but visible in dream. And then the sun, we're not dreaming usually when the sun is shining, unless we're having some kind of reverie or daydream.
Or you live in Alaska.
Or you live in a place where the sun, yes, exactly. So yes.
You made me think of, I was thinking about talking about this for our moon episode, but about Jacob Boehme, the 16th, 17th century mystic.
I don't think so, actually. Tell me.
So Jacob Boehme was this mystic in the Renaissance, and he was like a shoemaker, actually. And then just one day had a mystical vision of Sophia. And so he saw Sophia, and he had like this great understanding of who Sophia was. And so, if people don't know, Sophia is a Gnostic goddess whose name, Sophia, the name means wisdom in Greek. And so there's a lot of references to her. We have like the Book of Wisdom in the Bible, but in the Gnostic tradition, she was far more personified as an actual figure of wisdom, a goddess of wisdom. And so in the Middle Ages, Renaissance period, there was this huge return of that Gnostic Sophia image. And so Jacob Boehme had this revelation about her, and he described her as the moon and as God is the sun, and basically described their relationship as being that God, being the sun, is this full light of everything, of all knowledge, of all understanding, of all experience, and shines that on Sophia. And then Sophia, being the moon, can reflect that down onto us, and then we can actually look at it. Because we can't actually look at the sun. We can't look at God in all of its, perfect understanding of everything and have our eyes on it for more than half a second. We'll burn ourselves to death. But we can look at the moon for endlessly. And the moon is reflecting the sun's light on us. And so I just thought that was a very pretty kind of way of understanding or thinking about that reflection of the unconscious, how we can actually, sit with it and look at it and be with it in a different way than this kind of solar consciousness, which is kind of like burns us a little bit. It scorches us. So anyway, that's a little, I always like that idea.
That's beautiful. I love
Yeah.
that so much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that that's, a way of understanding sometimes what that, feminine wisdom kind of feels like. It's something that it's embodied. We can really stay with it and be with it for a long time, rather than this kind of very intellectual, enlightened understanding, which kind of feels like too big and too hard to kind of get this big picture of things. But in the tarot, we have the sun card. Obviously, I talked about the moon card last time. And so with the sun card, I really like the progression from the moon to the sun, because a lot of times the sun is actually one of my least favorite cards in the tarot, because I'm just a mean Scorpio person. And I don't like happiness. No, I just don't know what to do with it all the time.
Nice.
Like, it's too easy.
Well, it just feels too good to be true. And I think that's the problem. And again, like, yes, there's a lot of Scorpio and Capricorn in this shared friendship synastry chart conversation. But like, yeah, so the sun, it does feel kind of like, okay, well, shoot, I guess it's all going to be fine. And it's like, how do you really believe that?
Yeah.
But,
it's just like yelling at you, be more optimistic, stop being a cynic. Which, no, thank you. I like being a cynic. I think it serves me well. But the thing with the sun is that I literally, my skin crawls anytime someone like pulls the sun. They're like, oh, wonderful, joy. And I'm like, you're like, no, it's not, it can't be that simple as just happiness, joy, be optimistic. The sun, just as we were talking about the moon, was this experience of being lost in the unconscious, being lost in the space of lunar consciousness, where we're in the world of dream, of embodied feeling, of, memory, of this place of just kind of getting lost within ourselves. The sun represents the full illumination of the moment of understanding things, with all, like, everything being visible, light shining on every little facet of who we are. And it is a momentary experience. It can't last very long, because that's the experience of being a conscious person. We do have those points, those moments where we go, oh shit, I see it. And that's crazy. And I understand why I am at this point in my life, or who I am right now. And honestly, I think in those moments where we have that experience of I see it all, that's actually when we approach bliss. Because if we're able to see it all, we're able to accept it all just in that moment. We're not actually fighting against it, because there's nothing trying to be repressed back down. There's nothing that we're trying to edge away from. And it's just this, I always say when I see the sun card, I always tell my clients, like, maybe just go for a walk. Like, you're supposed to be deeper than that. Like, but honestly, sometimes it's as simple as getting out of our own limited kind of struggles and experience and stepping out into the world that is so much bigger than us. And having the light that sees us land on us, and feeling a little bit smaller and a little bit more lost in this oneness of everything, and seeing ourselves with a little bit more perspective. And that shift can actually be monumental. I had a very powerful experience when I was 16 or so, where I was walking home from school. This is so me. It's ridiculous. I was walking home from school, and I looked up at the sun, and I burst into tears and fell on the ground and couldn't walk for like a few minutes. Because it like hit me, like the glory of living, and like the fact that no problem was too big to like be fully alive. Yeah, it was ridiculous. And so it was like it hit me so hard. And I was like, I am never going to be afraid again. Like, what is there to be afraid of? Death is beautiful. Life is beautiful. Suffering is beautiful. Everything is extraordinary. It is blissful to have a beating heart. Like, how could anything ever be bad again in my life? And it was a really, really powerful moment. And that was like the moment of the sun for me. And I felt it, and I got it, and I understood it, because I could see myself in its totality. in this way zoomed out way that was so extraordinary, because I had full
Mhm.
consciousness of my complexity in that moment, and I allowed it. I didn't resist it.
Mhm.
And living was better than being worried about whatever things I didn't know how to, integrate within myself. And it often makes us feel
Mhm.
like youthful too. We have the symbol of the divine child. We often get like, and it's a naked child too, symbolizing that, we're not covered by anything. We're exposing ourselves fully. We're seeing ourselves fully.
And trusting in that
Exactly.
space. Mhm.
Yeah. So it can be that brilliant moment, but it's not just be happy. And if anybody out there is learning tarot, it's a little deeper than be happy. But maybe sometimes too deep for us to actually like think of it that way. But honestly, anytime I pull the sun card for myself, I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a walk
Mm.
and just zoom out and just see if I
Yeah.
can do that.
The sun is profoundly healing. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not like a summer person. I, again, like
Yeah, me neither.
prefer the gloom of fall and winter, which is really annoying of me, but whatever. But like, if you get me to a beach where there is sun and ocean, I will be like in my happiest state of
Yeah.
being ever. And it's because I feel like just so revived by the sun. And it's really, really magical what happens. And obviously, there's like a biological component. Like, we're all vitamin D deprived, sitting in our houses on our computers, making podcasts and doing spreadsheets and being upset and whatever. But I think that the sun is, again, it's like, it is so important. And what I love about what you were saying about the clarity or the knowing, like
Yeah.
the seeing of the self, like, it reminded me of the Delphic maxim, know thyself. And
Yeah.
I think that in order to do that, we need the sun. And so then in my brain, I'm like, okay, the Oracle at Delphi, that was an Oracle of Apollo, and Apollo is the later sun god. He
Yeah.
becomes the more important resident solar figure, taking Helios's place in the pantheon. Not that Helios went away, but Apollo really at some point became more prominent as a solar god. And so what's cool about that is that what you were talking about, that moment of clarity or that moment of seeing, it is that sort of the illumination of like divine insight, or a kind of the illumination that a prophecy or something prophetic can bring to our
Yeah.
awareness, is very much what the like Apollo's oracle would be bringing to heroes on their path, bringing illumination to the dark path ahead. And so there is this really interesting link between knowledge, insight, rationality, and then this other kind of just knowing that the
Yeah.
sun can also bring. And very simply put, like, the sun lights up the world so that we can see what we're doing, and we
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to know everything about the world without the light of the sun. The light of the moon and nocturnal light is also very important, but we don't grow our food by the light of the moon, I don't think. I'm sure it has an
Yeah.
influence, but as far as I know, photosynthesis is the light of the sun,
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
affecting our green things. So I think that there's this really interesting link between the sun and something of like divine consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
divine awareness that comes through. So pulling the sun card, or going to the Oracle of Delphi, and seeking out that sort of illuminating moment of like clarity, brilliance, understanding, connection, is
Yeah.
something that's possible, made possible by the sun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that one of the I want to say this is Marion Woodman, but it totally might not be. I'm not sure. But I read at some point, from one of the Jungian people, that the difference between the light of the sun and the moon is that the sun is constant. It does
Mm-hmm.
not change. It is
Mm-hmm.
always
Exactly.
exactly the same. We spin, the earth spins so that we can't see the sun anymore, but it is literally always there and
Mm-hmm.
changeless. And so this kind of bringing it back to that idea of like this solar consciousness and the way society prioritizes the solar consciousness, we also have this expectation of this linear progression, this like
Yes.
constancy of
Yes.
always being exactly the same and things not changing. um, versus the moon, which absolutely symbolizes the cyclical nature of things.
Mm-hmm.
Change every day. The moon is in a slightly different position from us. It appears different to us. It moves in these patterns, and we also move through cyclic patterns. And so, like whenever I pull the sun card for people, especially if they're, a client is telling me something like they're waiting for something to happen, or they're in a really tough time right now and they just want to get out of this tough time, I always wonder if they're expecting the happiness to just come, that they have this like linear progression that they're supposed to be, take a step each day toward, and then they're just going to arrive there.
Mm-hmm.
Then
Mm-hmm.
they'll be in the sun, they'll see it all, they'll get it all, they'll understand what they need to do, and everything's going to be great. And it's such a false reality. It's such a huge lie, because the sun, it allows us to grow by illuminating everything. We can see everything, but we need the other side of being able to move with the cyclical
Mm-hmm.
nature of things and of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, and allow ourselves to also get lost and be wandering. This is, as I was saying before, like the moon moves into the sun because we move through our inner spaces with such intimacy, and such receptivity, that we actually learn the things we need to know in order to get to the sun and see it clearly.
Yeah.
And so we need that constant repetition of that pattern of going inward and learning and being lost, and having it be dark, and finding these rhythms within ourselves. And then, okay, I see it. I understand how I can grow and how I can develop and what I need to do. There's actually, in alchemy, there's a few stages of the alchemical process, and Jung, who was trying to use alchemy to illuminate how individuation might work, he at some point made this framework of, there's these 4 steps in alchemy, that mirror the 4 steps of the individuation process. The first one being the nigredo, which is the blackening. So we get broken down, we disintegrate, we go through the shadow experience. Then the albedo, the whitening, the a purification of ourselves and distilling ourselves into the different parts so we can look at them. Then the citrinitas, which is the yellowing, which I associate that with the sun, which is he called it the moment of education, which is the moment that we actually learn it. We actually see the things and we learn what they're about. Why did we have this pattern? Why do we, have that fear that we can't let go of? That's what the sun shows us. And then we can go to the rubedo, which is the reddening, the transformation, the actual like judgment moment where we're like, oh, and then we resurrect. So I think that is something that the sun, does for us too. It teaches us what we need to see, and so that we can actually make those transformations and growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, so cool. And citrinitas, like that must come from the word citrine, the
Yeah,
yellow crystal.
exactly.
It's really cool, which is of course associated with the sun and I think
Mm-hmm.
Mars as well. So yeah, that's very interesting. That's a crystal that people like keep in their wallets or like near their cash registers because it's like a manifesting money crystal.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're talking about, that sort of inner and outer, I keep coming back to this image of like the oracle
Yeah.
for Apollo,
Yeah.
right? If like the sun god is there to be illuminating the world, he also requires that sort of like collaborator of the Pythia who is
Yeah.
in the cave, and this feminine kind of like raving incomprehensible internal figure who receives his insight and projects it out to the hero,
Yeah.
right? With the hero never really
Right.
interacts with Apollo himself.
That
It's always
sounds like
through.
the Sophia image of
Yeah,
the moon and the sun. Yeah, it's so
that's very cool.
similar.
I never made that connection. I
Yeah.
love that. And so I think that that's all fascinating. And the sun as a symbol of individuation is also very, very important in general. And so, yeah, like there's a solar moment in that alchemical process, I'm sure. But a lot of times, to kind of take us down an astrological rabbit hole, the sun is interesting because it's the first piece of our chart that we know. And right, we know when our birthday is, so we're like, oh, I'm a Virgo, I'm a Scorpio, and you read your horoscope, and
Mm-hmm.
if that's as far as you go, that's as far as you go. But what happens when you learn about, like, you have a whole natal chart and you have all these other
Yeah.
planets? you realize that you get overwhelmed immediately and you're like, oh my God, there's more than the sun. And you kind of put the sun to the side because you're like, I need to know about my Mercury. I need to know about my Neptune on the ascendant.
Right.
I need to know about all these things. And then in my experience, what winds up happening is you wind up circling back to the sun, because at the end of the day, the sun is the sort of essence or the root of you. And wherever it's sitting in your chart is this place where we can imagine the force of self is you're here to illuminate through that sector of the chart and through that position. So I think that, like, I know that you're a Scorpio sun. Do you also know what's very special about your sun in your chart?
Tell me.
Okay, you are a sun conjunct the midheaven person. And so the sun has this really, really important position in your chart where it's sitting in the 10th house, which is the house of our legacy, opposite to the house of our ancestry. And when it's conjunct the midheaven, that's one of those very fast moving points, one of the angles that is a very precise piece of data in your chart that's unique to you at that particular moment. And it means that you've come into this world to do something solar, to be a force of illumination. And that could be for yourself and your family line, or that could be for other people. So like the archetype of Scorpio is what is here to like be illuminated through that solar position. And so the pursuit of secrets and psychology and its many ephemeral tendrils and cycles of death and rebirth and the search for deep truth. And so falling down when you're a child and seeing the sun and falling down and having a conniption is very don't you feel like that's a very New York word, conniption?
Oh my God, it's the most New York word.
I love it.
Conniption fit, as they say. You're having a conniption fit.
Anyway, so I think that that's interesting. You are a very solar person because your sun is conjunct the midheaven, but you don't, you were saying that you have struggle with the sun card. I think that that's actually interesting for you. And I'm not here to dissect you, but I think that it's because the kind of solar experience that you're having is in that scorpionic kind of flow and that archetype of
in the darker
search
stuff of the mystery. I think that the miracle child complex in me was listening very hard and is now going to have a calm down later. But that's very sweet. And I really love that. I really love how, I totally agree with you that the sun, as a lot of people learn a bit more about astrology, they kind of forget the sun a little bit. It's like sometimes they feel like it's the least interesting part of them.
It's like, oh, so what? It's like, no, actually, you have to go back to it. You have to remember the sun.
Yeah. I mean, I identify with a lot of pieces of my chart very clearly and deeply. And other parts, of course, I'm a little bit more confused about, as we all experience, But my sun is the part that's always been like, yes, immediately yes. The first time I ever found out about astrology when I was, a kid and like had some book that told me what Scorpios were like, I was like, how did it know? How did it know me? It's scary.
That's so cute.
Oh my gosh.
I believe it. So you and I have very strong suns. My sun is in Virgo, as I've said 1,000 times on this show, but it's also in a position where it's conjunct the part of fortune. So that's one of those fast moving points as well. Yep. So it makes my sun quite strong. But I do the sun differently than you. I'm doing it through the lens of Virgo. So there is a little bit more of like an orientation to probably the mundane than in the Scorpionic
Which is
realm.
why you always, remind me to have a snack after I've had a bad day of readings where we had a lot of tough ones. It's like, make sure you eat something.
I think after your first experience of doing like a big set of readings for a party or something like that for the first time, I was like, make sure you have a snack. And then you called me later and you're like, I didn't need a snack. And I was like,
no, but it was just cute because you said it a few times and you had said it to me before. And it's one of your things. You need a snack. You need a snack.
We crown through food. It's true. And so, my sun is in the 9th house. That house is about like languages and culture. And it's like the house of divination and stuff like that. And so I feel like very attached to that. But you know, and that I think for me helped me connect to my Virgo-ness when I was learning about my chart. Because a lot of things that you read about Virgo is like, oh, you're the helper. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I am a helper and I have always been. But like, what's that say about a person? So anyway, all this to say, looking at not only the sign of your sun, but its house position and its
Yeah.
aspects. What house does it rule in your chart? Like
Mm-hmm.
my sun rules the eighth house of my natal chart. So there's an eighth house connection there that's really important to me too. So we always have to kind of come back to it. And I think that it's interesting that we're talking a lot about the sun in relationship to the moon,
Yeah.
because, you know, when we think about those being like the kind of constant bedrock foundational components, maybe of self in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
those are also the only two celestial bodies that don't go retrograde. And we need them in order
Yeah.
to really thrive and survive. And we need them to always be moving forward. So we know that the sun is, yes, constant in its march, and it is here to enlighten and create a day. And the moon is also going to be, you know, predictably like changeable. She is
Mm-hmm.
predictably changeable in her flow and
Yeah.
her rhythm, and it's as a result of her relationship to the sun. But those two things are never going to backtrack on us. They're always kind of like moving us a
Yeah.
little bit forward. The sun has more of a teleological vibe. You're totally right. It is more about the kind of goal or the
Yeah.
journey of the hero. And
Yeah.
I'd like to kind of think about what that the hero's journey entails a little bit maybe, but the moon is cyclic in that relationship with the sun in her own flow. So, yeah. Anyway, I hope that made sense, but it
It
just
made a
clicked
lot
in
of
my
sense.
brain. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that you know, there is something about the solar hero and this idea of the journey and the destination, which is it's important for us because what it symbolizes is that there are moments where we arrive. And I think that's really important. The tarot teaches us this, mythology teaches us this, that there are resolutions to our stories. And when we're inside of our lives, we can't see that way. The sun kind of shows us that. It shows us these arrival points sometimes where we're like, I am here. And 3 years ago I was there and I went through a journey. And the challenges, and that's, you know, I love that moment in the tarot so much between the sun and judgment, because once you see it, the question is, can you accept it?
Mm-hmm.
And can you do what you need to change it? And that's the resurrection. And most people, or a lot of people, they got too scared and they take the step backwards. And they're like, but how do I ask my, you know, son to forgive me for not loving him well enough? How do I, you know, apologize to my wife for cheating on her 10 years ago and never being able to let that go? Whatever the thing is, like, how do we accept it and make amends with it? And that's the judgment point in the tarot. But the first one is the sun saying, "You see it now, don't you?"
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the end of the journey for us, in this kind of, at least that sun kind of arrival point of like just seeing it sometimes is enough too. Sometimes we don't have to act on it right away. We can just let it simmer. Anyway, I like to remind people of that because sometimes we freak out too when we see something about ourselves. When we get consciousness about it, we think that we then have to make this sudden change, um, and we don't have to push ourselves to that all the time. Sometimes, yes, we know when, okay, we can't let this keep going, but other
Mm-hmm.
times we can just let the consciousness continue to spread and to become clearer. I think it's really important.
It's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like the myth of Icarus, of flying too close
Mm-hmm.
to the sun, and
Yep.
right, that in that myth, Icarus is the son of Daedalus, who is the guy who built the labyrinth in
Yep.
Minos, and he was this like master sort of like woodworker builder guy, and he decided to make wings out of wax and feathers that actually worked. And his son Icarus wanted to try them out, and he said, you know, you can absolutely try them, but you can't go too high close to the sun because the wax will melt. Icarus does not listen. He's another young man who falls into the sea, just like Phaethon. So there's a theme for the day. But getting
Mm-hmm.
too close to the sun is this kind of like archetypal metaphor or symbol of like the way that consciousness and heat, and it can
Yeah.
singe and it can burn.
It can burn us.
Right.
Yeah.
It can really, I've had many bad sunburns. And I think that, it's also, it's important to know, just like you were saying, that when you have those flashes of solar insight, of knowing, of seeing, you don't have to rush and push to twist yourself into something new immediately. It's almost like coming to a rhythmic or a kind of like balanced orientation to the sun is letting the sun illuminate and then pausing, maybe using that lunar experience
Yeah.
of reflection
Yeah.
and moving from there with the information that the sun reveals to you instead of leaping into the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that, something that's been coming up lately a lot, I've been going to yoga a lot, and it's been really
Mhm.
lovely. And one of our teachers will say, if we're in a particular position, notice your feet in this position. And if your knee is tracking above your ankle, notice it. You don't have to change anything, but just notice it. And I'm like, oh, it's so good. Instead of being like forcing ourselves into the correct posture or something like that,
Yeah.
I like just being able to bring awareness to it. And then when my body has balanced, to then like move into what would be
Yeah.
a more appropriate expression of that position, that posture in class. So I do think that that's what we're supposed to do with the sun. So too
Yeah.
much sun is the burn or the rush or the flame without control. And then, the wise sun is about illumination, which lets us make choices from an informed standpoint, I guess.
Yeah.
That's where that know thyself sort of ribbon comes to tie around the whole idea.
I think that's perfect. And I think that's actually probably a perfect point to kind of move on to maybe a symbol now, because you wrapped it up so beautifully.
Okay, let's do it.
If you're enjoying this podcast, we encourage you to learn more about how you can support us on Patreon. There's many benefits available, including extended episodes, guided tarot meditations, and astrology transit journals. But all listeners are welcome to share a symbolic experience for us to explore on the show.
Therefore, we invite listeners to pull those symbols from their lives, whether they come from a dream or synchronicity.
Thank you to today's sharer, and please tell us your symbolic experience on our website, sorormysticapodcast.com.
Are you a small business looking to reach a targeted audience of people who are interested in things like spirituality, esoterica, obscure academia, holistic living, magic, the occult, or other related topics? If this sounds like you, Soror Mystica would love to invite you to become an advertiser on our show. As Soror Mystica has a highly tailored audience of mindful, curious, depth-seeking listeners, we would be delighted to be able to give your business a place to reach new eyes, new ears, and new hearts. If you're interested in becoming an advertiser, you can find our application form at our website, which is sorormysticapodcast.com/advertise with us. Thank you so much for being a part of our listener community, and we really look forward to hearing more about your unique business quite soon.
Hannah Carey of Rewild the Empress is a life coach for the spiritually curious female. Hannah is ICF accredited and passionate about providing a space for self-acceptance and recommitting to live in an authentic and aligned way by recognizing where systems, structures, and history may have led us astray. Hannah's clients often come from a place of feeling destined for more and at the same time fear they may not be enough or that they are failing. So if this is you, go check out hannahcareycoaching.com or find Hannah on Instagram as Rewild the Empress. If you're a deep and soulful tarot beginner who's wanted to jumpstart their journey with the cards, I want to let you know about my new Foundations of the Tarot workshop. This 3-week class is all about guiding you through the fundamentals of tarot and initiating your psycho-spiritual work with the cards. And this is no copy-paste tarot class. We'll explore the cards with archetypal depth, moving beyond memorization to cultivate intuitive relationship, and then actually putting the theory to practice. In addition, this workshop comes with a hefty continued resource guide and the Archetypal Tarot Elements ebook, which is a compilation of the symbols and archetypal keywords of all 78 cards of the tarot and an exclusive offering of the workshop. The class begins May 23rd, meaning there's only a few more days left to register, so go to persephonesister.com or click the link in the show notes, and I'll see you there.
Okay, so this symbol is both a synchronicity and a dream appearance, which is a synchronicity unto itself, but we will see how this flows. So it goes like this. Our new friend had a dream about the magician card being pulled for him. He doesn't know much about tarot, so he didn't know anything about the card. Later, when walking through a market, he found a tote bag with the magician on it. He bought it and asked to learn more about the card. This weekend, he came over to our house, realized I liked tarot, and asked me to read for him. I'd never read for anyone ever, so I was nervous and excited. The very first card that I pulled for him was the magician. Our jaws dropped. He hadn't shared that in the dream, the card was emanating golden light, and of all of my decks to read from, I chose Golden Art Nouveau.
My favorite.
It's beautiful. That same night, I dreamt that I was pulling cards for him again, but with a different deck. In my dream, I again pulled the magician. To be the first time I ever read for someone, it felt wild, magic, and beautiful. I would love your insight on this. He is going through a moment where he wants to leave his current career and doesn't know what to do next. And I have been doing a lot of spiritual work and growth.
Wow. So I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. So first, the friend had a dream about someone pulling the magician card for him, but he doesn't know about the tarot that much, just kind of like, I guess, came in contact with it a little bit. Then saw a tote bag with the magician on it and bought that. Then wanted a reading from our sharer, and they pulled the magician for him. And then she dreamt that she was pulling cards for him again and pulled the magician yet again. So it came up 4 times. Wow.
Do you remember that period of time where you were only pulling the magician in
Yeah,
reverse?
it was really annoying.
Let's talk about it. So for all of this, I love the kind of night and day duality, the solar and the lunar appearances of the magician. And right, the magician is also a figure, at least in the Rider-Waite tarot and other tarots based on Rider-Waite, a figure who's pointing one hand up to the sky and one hand down to the earth as a kind of like conduit for the divine forces, and also this reminder of the macrocosm and the microcosm, the above and the below.
Above, so below. Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that when I think about the magician appearing, I think about the archetype of Mercury and of even Gemini, perhaps even Virgo. But I think about the kind of impetus for us to use the tools at our disposal to create. And I think that there's something about the magician that is about knowing that you have the tools on your table to be that sort of creative force in the cosmos to make something happen. So yeah, what does this do for you?
I have a lot of thoughts, and also I'm just going to preface this with saying I'm not going to be able to tell you what the magician is about. Because the magician is one of those cards where it's like, I don't know. Who knows what the magician is about? He is about, the pure act of making life. I mean, it's just so vital. So the magician is one of the cards that tends to come up in repetition for people. As you said, I've had that experience. I know a lot of other people have had that experience. The magician is one of the cards that points to synchronicities in and of itself. It is kind of a card that if it pops into the psyche, it's going to keep popping up because it is the channel between the macrocosm and the microcosm. And that channel is how synchronicities happen. The inner world somehow is engaged in a magical way with the outer world. And so we keep getting these symbols and these signs. That's literally what the magician does. So it is extremely natural it's common at least to see that synchronicities, intensify when the magician kind of comes into the space. And with the magician, one of the big symbols with that card is the number 1. He's the first card of the tarot. And that's really significant because a lot of people start the tarot with the Fool. You can start the journey with the Fool, of course, but the Fool is 0, and that's not accidental, right? The magician is number 1. So there is what is the archetypal symbolism of 1? It is total unity, the total unified experience. full consciousness of like, us and our power. It is an extremely potent card of manifestation, extremely potent card of, as you were saying, all the tools are on our table. So we can work with what we have already. We don't need to wait for other things to come in. We can start the process of living a life. And it's absolutely trying to be this, as I've said already a few times, but it's just the perfect word, the channel between the inspiration beyond and the actual experience of living.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I should say too, like I mentioned all the tools being on the table, but like in that card, for those who are not familiar, or use a different version of the tarot, in the Rider-Waite based, the Pamela Coleman Smith, I should say,
Yeah,
like
which the Golden Art Nouveau is basically a replica of it.
yeah. And so in that card on the table that the magician is standing in front of, he has all the symbols that correspond to the 4 suits of the minor arcana. So he has a cup, a pentacle, a sword, and a wand, right? Is he holding the wand, or?
There's also, I think, a wand on the table.
Yeah. And it's
because
just
the wand in his hand is like a baton, and
yes,
it comes,
it's
the only
different.
time it's seen again is in the world card at the final card.
That's fascinating. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
God, it's so cool. So anyway, I think that if this person is seeing the sort of like, to bring it back to what you were saying about the one or the beginning.
Yeah.
And I love your take on like the fool in the world, and that being like the sort of, I don't know, that being its own sort of conversation in the tarot, starting the journey at the magician, at the one. We've got a brand new tarot reader, and we've got somebody who is looking to encounter the tarot for the first time.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, to me, one of those moments where I'm very content to just say, the universe is winking at you and saying, we know that you're doing this work to start this journey. And remember that on that journey, you already have everything that you need in order to get to where you're going. And that's sometimes something that we forget, and the magician can remind us, is that we actually do have the tools oftentimes when we're trying to like manifest something. And remember, that word manifestation came up in the Tarnis rendition of the sun. When we're trying to like manifest things, if that's money or relationships or a new job or whatever we're trying to bring into our lives, we often feel like we can't do it until we have X item or X thing secure or whatever.
Right.
And what the magician can remind us is that there is this sort of like really good, fertile inner world that actually is very enriched already. So moving from there on all of our journeys is what the magician allows us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is in and of itself kind of just a symbol of being available to channel what the thing is that's coming to us. I totally agree with you that the magician is, we want it to mean something really powerful because we think it does. And I mean, it does, but it's not like some big mystery of like, oh my gosh, you know what you need to do? You need to run for president. It's not going to be some crazy thing. I feel like the magician always comes up and it's like, go do it. Go live it. You have it. It's here. Be receptive. Open up your experience to the macrocosmic, signs that are coming at you, and just follow the path that comes. One of the keywords that I like for the magician, because you mentioned Mercury, and so especially in the Rider-Waite, he's connected to the alchemical god Mercurius, who is Mercury, but he's kind of like a more alchemy oriented version of him, in which he's about, not as much about like communication and stuff as he is about being this kind of facilitator of magical workings happening in the process. He's the patron of alchemy, and so we have Mercurius, and then of course the other patron of alchemy is Sophia, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. Sophia being wisdom. And so these are the two like gods of alchemy. Mercurius is connected to the sun. Sophia is connected to the moon. They're called Sol and Luna sometimes. The marriage of Sol, Luna is the marriage of Mercurius and Sophia. It's all connected. It's gorgeous. I love it so much. But Mercurius is also the aspect of the spirit. So Sophia is sometimes, especially in alchemy, called the anima mundi, the world's soul. And so Mercurius is called the spiritus mundi, the world's spirit. And so that's one of the things I like to layer in with the magician as well, because we're connected to this kind of world spirit, this spirit within us, which is the difference between, I'm gonna get lost in the whole weeds here, so I'm not gonna go down the rabbit hole. But basically, the spirit is the part of us that can kind of rise above us and connect to things beyond us. And so the magician is the symbol of that. Here we are. We can rise beyond our little mortal life and actually connect to something enormous and magical and profound and so big. And we can bring it back down into our embodied work and manifest it. So I would say that this is a shared symbol between you and your friend. For sure. It's not just his. And the fact that you both dreamt it means that it was like both an active archetype. It's something connecting the two of you right now, which is really interesting. I definitely agree with you that, you're beginning to read for other people or just trying it out, or you just did it for the first time and there was something really exhilarating about that. So you probably tapped into some really powerful potential within you, some powerful, just a really powerful moment of you actually being able to connect to the greater world, which whether you continue to read for people or not doesn't matter, because that moment was really significant and tapped you in very deeply. And I would say your friend's got to make some stuff. Probably his life's probably trying to move somewhere a little bit.
Yes, there's a huge creativity component to the magician, which we've kind of gestured at, but should explicitly say it's about making and creating something new. So art, writing, whatever, anything that you're trying to do.
You mentioned leaving his current career, but he doesn't know what to do next. That's usually when the magician comes in and they're like, I got to go make a life, but I'm not exactly sure what it should be. Yeah. But the making of the life is very important. Go make the life that's actually yours. And then the whole journey will erupt from there because then you have to figure out what it is. So that was a good one. I really enjoyed that. Thank you for sharing it. So thank you, everyone, for listening to our episode on the sun. Don't forget to check out the Foundations of the Tarot workshop if you're interested in that. And we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us in our conversation today.
Please consider supporting the podcast by leaving a review and following Soror Mystica wherever you listen.
You can also become a more active supporter and a member of the Soror Mystica community by joining our Patreon.
If you have a symbolic experience that you'd like to share with us for the podcast, you can tell us all about it at sorormysticapodcast.com.
The music for this podcast is written and performed by me, Mariana Lewis, with special thanks to Stefan Lewis. You can connect with both Cristina and myself on Instagram and get to know our work by clicking on the links in the show notes.
As the alchemical motto goes, as above, so below, as within, so without.
May this ancient wisdom continue to guide you deeper.
Until next time, take good care.